Retired paramedic story time. I should write a book about my paramedic days. I posted this in a different hour and had quite the response. Thought I'd share it here. Retired paramedic here. Had a call on a very desolate stretch of road for a car sitting in the middle of the road, covered in blood. Of course it has to happen at 2 a.m., just like every horror story. We arrive on scene and find a new Camaro sitting in the middle of the road that had obviously been in an accident. Problem is, there is absolutely nothing else around the car. No persons, no other vehicles, nothing. Part of my job then was a tactical paramedic for our sheriff's department. Sounds all exciting and high speed low drag. Nope, not as a medic. I got paid to wait for stuff to happen and sit in the rear with the gear. This being said, my paramedic partner and I both had pistols in the ambulance. As we start approaching the Camaro, my partner is shining a light around when he says really low, hushed and rushed. Back, 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 back. Now, now, now. He says. I shine my light in the car and there is intestines wrapped around the gear shifter and a lung in the back seat. So we kind of freak out, call dispatch, let them know what's happening, and we are in the process of getting out of there till the cops show up when we see a figure appear walking down the road towards us. As he gets closer, we see he is covered in blood and gore. We both throw on our tactical vests, helmets, snatch our pistols, as I sound like a frightened home alone 9-year-old on the radio to dispatch. We approach and start screaming at him to get on the ground, which he does. After everyone's heart rate is below 200 BPM, we start talking and figure out what happened. This guy had purchased a brand new Camaro and drove it to this desolate stretch of road to open it up. He said 1 minute he is shifting gears, and the next thing he knows his car is all over the road and his mouth was full of blood, and it seemed like an explosion had went off. I start looking his injuries over and can't really see anything major and ask him about the passenger in his car. He says, "What passenger?" My partner says, "There's a lung in your back seat." Dude goes straight into mental overload and can't come up with anything, so I'm thinking he's hurt. Get him in the ambulance. Police are 5 minutes away. We potentially have another victim out there. I have to go look by myself. I walk through the crash scene, look in the car, and sure enough, intestines wrapped around the gear shifter, lung in the back seat, looks like parts of a liver. Looks like a hand grenade went off inside the car. I walk around the other side of the car and see a faint blood smear stain on the road. Walk to it. See something else further down the road, so I keep walking towards it. I finally see something on the side of the road and run up to it, honestly completely freaked out and scared to death about the body I was about to see, and the dude had hit a deer. What happened is when he was winding the car out, state police estimated him well over 100 mph. A deer jumped into his car's pathway and hit the top corner of the windshield with its stomach. When the windshield crashed, it created a negative vacuum in the car, sucking almost all of the deer's organs out and into his car and all over him. I had the fire department decontaminate him, wrapped him in some blankets, and took him to the hospital. For many, many years after, my wonderful 911 dispatchers happily played the recording for anyone who wished to hear it. In my hometown of Nashville, we had 3 different science teachers in the winter semester of my senior year. We all loved Mrs. S. Harper, but she went on maternity leave. Her replacement was a nutcase. She was a complete psycho. She lasted 2 weeks before the principal had to let her go. They had a disagreement about what science is and what religion is. She is replaced by Mr. Christensen. The first thing he does is redecorate the science lab with all his taxidermy. Some are pretty cool, but it freaked out many kids, especially the freshmen. He had all kinds of animals stationed all around the lab. On his desk up front, he had an armadillo, and on top of the chemistry cabinet, a raccoon. The girls found the possum the creepiest because its eyes were so bright and seemed to stare at you from wherever you were in the room. I was fascinated by the taxidermy and looked closely at the animals with Mr. Christensen. He's weird but knowledgeable. He said taxidermy has been his hobby since he was in high school. I complimented his work, and he just swelled with pride. He was more used to criticism and shrieks than compliments. Several classmates accused me of sucking up to get a better grade, but I was awed by the realness of the eyes. Mr. Christensen even said the eyes are the key to great taxidermy. In life, the eyes of humans and animals are the most intricately designed feature of our faces. Our eyes are as unique as our personalities. Our eyes aren't just the windows to our souls, they are our souls. Fast forwarding 10 years. I'm working in Nashville and Merritt. My wife and I love these crime scene investigation shows, so in the evenings before bed we watch. This one night they are dissecting the crimes of a serial killer and they put a picture of a man's face up on the screen. It was my senior year science teacher. I screamed. That's Bill Christensen. He wasn't the victim on the coroner's table. He was the killer. He was our science teacher only for a few months as Mrs. Harper returned after her maternity leave in the spring. But for 3 months, we had a serial killer as our teacher. The man in the kitchen. One day I was with my mom. We went to go over her best friend at the time house. I want to say I was around 34. Her house was located on the east side of La. She stayed in this big brown 3-bedroom old school type of home. It had an upstairs and basement. The house already gave spooky vibes during the nighttime just by the way it looked. But anyways, we ended up staying over all day. My mom's befriend Pooh had this stairway that led to the upstairs bedrooms. I remember it was night time, the lights in the house were on, but no one was downstairs. I hear my mom and Pooh laughing, talking, etc. The TV downstairs was on, and on the screen was Rugrats. I was watching the TV from the staircase. I remember sliding down each stair one by one all the way to the bottom. When I reached the bottom, I'm now in this spacious living room, just standing there looking around. I wasn't all the way familiar with the house yet, so I just explored with my eyes. Now looking around, my focus stops right at the kitchen. I see an older African American man sitting in a chair at the kitchen table. He had on reading glasses. He wasn't facing me, it was like he was just living. I felt like a ghost. Not once did he look my way, and not once did I go near him. I wasn't scared. He didn't make me feel uneasy. He just literally sat there looking like he was just waiting for his morning coffee or something I did. Of course, I did crawl my ass back upstairs as fast as I could to my mom and Pooh and told them immediately. Now here's the scary part. After telling them what I just saw, they both looked at me crazily. I scared my mom's best friend because the description of the man I saw in the kitchen was her dad, who passed away from a heart attack in that house years before I was born. My mom knew him as well since they were teenagers. She told me that he used to smoke his cigarettes and he'd always be in that kitchen sitting down with his newspaper. I scared my mom's best friend to the point that every time she would see me after this altercation, she'd ask me if I seen anything else. Sadly, I never saw him again, but I've definitely been in that house more than once. Overall, I like to think that was his comfort spot, his familiarity, his energy was watching over his house. Years later, after that encounter, my mom's best friend's house had burned down. I don't know exactly why or how. I did have to get some information, but even I found that to be kind of creepy sad. I'm 26 now. Yet I remember this like it was yesterday. This day as a police officer will haunt me forever. When I was a police officer, a big part of my job was responding to suicides on the train tracks. People would regularly stand throw themselves in front of trains to end their lives. It was often my job to find the body, search the body for ID, pick the body parts up, place it in a body bag ready to be taken to the morgue. I have lost count on how many of these types of jobs I attended. Most of the time, the impact of the train obliterated the body, and I was there picking up pieces of flesh that were indistinguishable. No matter how gruesome each one was, they have all kind of blended into one memory in my mind, maybe a coping mechanism. Except for one. I was working the night shift and got a call on my radio about 3 a.m. to a person struck by a train. My team and I were all sitting in the office at the time. As soon as the call came in, we all jumped up and rushed into the police van. We drove on the dark, quiet roads of London to the train station. None of us said a word to each other the whole way there. It was silent. We were all too busy thinking about what we were potentially walking into too, what we were going to see. Once we arrived at the station, I saw the fire brigade there as well as the London ambulance service. Not many people realize it's us police officers that have to pick up these dead bodies. It's us. Unfortunately, it's us. Once the power on the train tracks was off, I walked onto the tracks ahead of my team with my torch to look for the body. I remember it being freezing cold and silent. The only noise was my feet hitting the rubble on the train tracks. After a long walk in the pitch black, I saw the body. I approached the body to get a closer look. What I saw has stayed with me ever since, and I don't think the memory will ever leave me. The man's eyes were staring right into my soul. His body was not smashed to pieces like all the jobs I had been to before. Instead, this man had placed his head perfectly on the rail tracks so that the train decapitated his head from the rest of his body. At this point, I waved the rest of my team over. We all kitted up with the correct equipment to do the body recovery. We were all there in the pitch black in our white body suits picking up his remains. I was the one who had to pick his head up from his hair and place it with the rest of the body in the body bag. He was still staring into my eyes as I was doing so. Once the body was in the body bag, 4 of us carried the bag on the tracks to get the body out of the station. While we were carrying the body bag, our arms started to get really tired, so I suggested to the team that we all swap sides to give one of our arms a break. As we gently placed the body bag down, laughter came from the bag, a really high-pitched, slow laugh, the kind of laugh that was laughing right at me. Chills went down my spine. I was so frightened that not only was I speechless, I could not process a thought. I was completely frozen. We all stopped and looked at each other. I just picked up this man's decapitated head. How could he be alive? How could he be laughing at us? I could see the fear on my colleagues' faces. Time seemed to freeze in this moment, and no one knew what to do. Eventually, we opened up the body bag. Whichever officer searched the body didn't see the man's phone that was in his inside jacket pocket. The man received a call from an unknown number, and his ringtone was his laughter, which we found out from the family later on. The laughter still stays with me till this day, and as a believer of the supernatural, I can't help but think, who made that call? Sleep paralysis creature. When I was about 10 or 11, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, not being able to move. It genuinely frightened me because I have never heard of sleep paralysis, and I had no idea why I couldn't move. I kept looking around my room. It was dark, only light up by the smallest bit of moonlight, and the light on my computer's power button, which added a greenish light to the room. As I looked around, I had the feeling I was being watched, but my heart sank when I noticed a hand slowly reaching up from the foot of my bed. The best way to describe this hand was it was dark, skinny, and had fingers that were about a foot long each. Just to give a better description, my bed was a loft, meaning it was basically a bunk bed that didn't have the bottom half. The only thing under my bed was my computer desk, so I would have to climb to get into my actual bed. I noticed my bed started shaking as the creature with the large skinny hands slowly ascended. I couldn't move or even scream for my dad, so the only thing I could do was close my eyes. When I opened them, the creature was gone. However, seconds later, I saw my bed start to shake, and once again, that hand slowly rises up from the foot of my bed. I did the same thing, closing my eyes, only to open them and see that the figure was gone once again. But a few seconds later, as you probably guessed, the same thing happened again. At this point, I felt a bit more in control, knowing that if the creature gets too close, I could simply close my eyes again. With this in mind, I guess I felt like I wanted to see how far he would come, so I kept my eyes opened a bit longer. This time the creature slowly makes its way onto my bed and finally gets far enough to reveal his face. And his face was just disturbing. It was pale and cartoonish, but would move as if it were running at like 20 FPS. It was not a face I could describe or even comprehend, and it did not match the dark, misty body it had. I was so terrified, and the fact that I couldn't move made it all the more traumatizing for me as a kid. I felt I was trapped, and there was nothing I could do. Well, except for one thing. So once again I closed my eyes and kept them shut for at least 15 seconds longer than usual. And at this point I felt like the creature would have been long gone, so I felt safe to open my eyes. But when I did, I felt like my world came to an end as my heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. The creature was like 2 inches from my face. If I could scream, that would have been an appropriate action at the time. But I still couldn't move. I closed my eyes again, and when I opened them he was gone, and I could move again. I felt a bit relieved that I could move, and I wanted to run to my parents' room across the hall. But I was still paralyzed, this time paralyzed with fear. I lay in my bed shaking, wondering what the heck just happened. Scary camping in Spain. So, about 10 years ago, I went on a road trip with my wife and 2 young sons, aged then about 3 and 4. We started in Montpellier, France, and made our way by car down through France and northern Spain, taking a few days in Barcelona before continuing a little further south. After a week or so of sightseeing, we ended up in a campsite that we had pre-booked by the beach in Tarragona. The campsite consisted of the usual arrive and pitch tent section, as well as mobile homes and bands, but on the beach, a little way from the main section, was a row of about 5 safari tents, basically large green safari tents with wooden frames pitched on a wooden base. The tents were situated in a long line and faced the sea about 50 meters directly ahead. Each safari tent had a zipped outer door which opened up to a small interior kitchen lounge section. Directly ahead were 2 further zipped doors which led into the 2 bedrooms which, having young kids, we had turned into 1 bedroom. The whole tent was about 6 x 6 meters. So the family and I settled into our tent, played games, had supper, etc., and went to bed. At what must have been 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up, desperately needing a pee. I recalled that it was windy outside and I could hear the sea, and after procrastinating for quite some time, realized I would have to venture outside no loo in the tent. So I got out of bed and unzipped the flap from the bedroom to the lounge area. I zipped it up to ensure our kids wouldn't escape if they woke up, and then I zipped the main door to the tent and went outside, again zipping up the tent. It must have been a full moon, or nearly full, because I could see the sea in the distance, so I walked towards it, far enough away from the tent that no one would see me or hear me. Once finished, I turned around and headed back to the tent. I climbed the wooden steps and unzipped the first flap, using the light from my iPhone to see. I turned around to zip it shut behind me. I then unzipped the flap to the bedroom, and as I opened the flap, I heard a noise unlike anything I had heard before or since. It was an emission of pure fear coming from the bed, where a terrified man stared back at me. I immediately realized that I had returned to the wrong tent. I recall saying something very English along the lines of "terribly sorry." There was a brief moment of panic as I had to unzip the exterior door, realizing that this man was behind me, but I assumed he just stayed in bed waiting for me to leave. I walked back to my own tent, next door, and woke my wife to explain what had happened. We both remained awake for a while, half expecting the man to come and find out what had happened, but he never appeared. In the morning, I went to the other tent to explain what had happened, but he had already left.